Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very pleased to be here today to share with you a presentation about a project we're very proud of on the campus of UC San Diego. It's called the North Torrey Pines Living and Learning Neighborhood. The topic of our conversation today is maintaining life and learning continuity through a pandemic, and we'd like to share with you some of the things that we're learning on that project that is just now opening over the last several months. The presenters today are Dr. Upali Nanda, who is the Director of Research for HKS and also the Executive Director of CADRE, the Center for Advanced Design Research and Evaluation. Diana Tang is one of our architectural designers that was very involved in the project, and Elinor Oren is a student living in the project actually on campus. She's our first Live Learn Lab Fellow, and we're very pleased and excited to tell you about that today. My name is Thom Greving. I'm a design director in the LA office for HKS. Next slide, please. We have a question up here. In a residential neighborhood on a campus, what aspects do you think are important in building a resilient community? And I would just encourage you to type a word or two in the chat, and you can kind of watch the responses come in and see what it is from everyone's point of view, either having been a student, being someone who works on a campus, to see just kind of what their point of view is. And also keep in mind that during the presentation, you're welcome to engage in opportunities to chat with everyone in the chat bar. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Guided by UC San Diego's first ever strategic plan written in 2014, the university is in the midst of a major transformation. We're very pleased at HKS to be a part of that transformation and working with two projects on them. Beyond the new buildings, however, there is an intellectual and cultural transformation that's underway. And it's re-energizing the student experience and sparking breakthrough research and innovation for the school. And it's targeting three different concepts. The first being enhancing student experience. The other goal is sparking research and innovation and enriching the campus community. And you'll see how those three concepts play into the presentation that we're making. The first campus plan was created in 1963, and it envisioned a series of campuses along the ridge. You see them here north to south in a string. And it was originally called the String of Pearls along the ridge. And it first reflected the idea of the university who wished to create a series of smaller campuses within a campus environment. And it would be defined by these series of neighborhoods, and each of them with individual personalities. You can see here that the campus is rather large. It's divided into three major portions. On the right is in the purple, two purple ellipses, is their healthcare campus. The center portion, where the blue and yellow circles are, is the West Campus, which is their academic campus. And then, excuse me, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the campus where Scripps Institution of Oceanography is located. You can see that the campus is very close to the ocean. Next slide, please. In fact, this is a view from the ocean, an aerial view of the campus. The yellow in the center of the slide is the location where this project we're talking about today is located. Next slide, please. So why do we need neighborhoods? These issues that you see here, mental health, physical health, and well-being, can really affect student achievement and their ability to grow as young adults into successful contributors in society. We know that in mental health, for instance, 63% of students have felt lonely in the past year, and these numbers have continued to go up and increase even in the pandemic situation. From a physical health and well-being situation, and these are just singular statistics, there obviously are more, but 37% of students are reported as overweight or obese. And loneliness is at an epidemic level in some regards. On the UC campus alone, there's approximately 1 in 4 students with a documented anxiety disorder. As the university prepared the detailed project program for the project, which was the document that we received in order to start our design work, they conducted extensive stakeholder visioning sessions in order to lead to the document that they turned over to us. In particular, the students shared what they thought and would create a perfect living and learning neighborhood. And among the comments that reflected the environment where they currently lived, which is something I'll tell you about a little bit later. But if you can see in these diagrams, the circles represent the comments that came back from them. The larger the circle, the more prominent the comment was, or more often the comment was made. You can see things like, feels like summer camp. This reflects the fact that they're coming from a smaller residential kind of camp-like environment where the current occupants incubated their college. They liked their central green space. They wanted to be distinct and have a focus on art and culture. You can see that all of these comments were very helpful to us in the design effort. Next slide. They were also very clear about what they do like and what they don't like. As students will be, they were very specific about, they liked engaging spaces. They liked active and welcoming environments. You know, they like to have the opportunity to be out in the open space and experience nature. They wanted something that was distinctive and specific to place. They had a real interest in something that reflected the culture of San Diego and La Jolla and the connection to the ocean. What they didn't like were, they don't like food trucks, which kind of surprised me. They don't like hard surfaces. They don't like to be exposed. They don't like things that are fake or artificial or industrial in nature. On the left, on this slide, you'll see the university goals and objectives as outlined in their campus master plan from 2018. These are goals that they had across the campus, but specifically for our project, making a neighborhood, leveraging context, activating public life, create sustainable mobility, instill resilience, promote the strategic vision for the university, and nurture academic excellence. To set the design team up to address their goals, the university provided a detailed project program. And it was kind of unusual in our experience. It was very qualitative as well as quantitative. And it was unique in 6 different ways, in our opinion. The first being that they were very focused on creating this integrated neighborhood. They wanted to make sure that this community that we were building was mixed use, multi-programmed, and very integrated. They also wanted a strong focus on environmental responsibility, not just to achieve credits for being lead, for instance, but they also wanted to make sure that the environment was, or that sort of approach to design was apparent when you lived in the environment. They were very focused on student wellness. They had a hospitality approach. They wanted to make sure that this was a welcoming community to everyone who came there, whether residents or otherwise. And they wanted us to focus on making sure that our learning environments were advanced. And one of the more unique items was there was a requirement for a piece of original research related to the project. And we're going to tell you about that as we move through the presentation. So just a little bit about the project from a stats standpoint. It's important to point out that the detailed project program intentionally established a mixed-use program, and it included these items on the right. It's residential residences, of course, over 2,000 beds. So it's a really large project. There were 200,000 square feet of academic building space, 64,000 square feet of community program, including things like dining, craft centers. There's a 650-seat auditorium, additional smaller auditoriums and classrooms, market, coffee shop, retail, and various other uses. There's a 1,200 vehicle underground parking structure, and 20,000 square feet of administrative buildings, including provost, student affairs, and academic advising. So the size of the site, it's about a 12-acre site. The building area is about 1.5 million square feet total at a cost of $628 million. It opened in the fall of 2020, but because of COVID, it's only partially occupied at a lower rate. The complete occupancy will occur as we move now into the fall of 2021. So the design team responded to these qualitative aspects of the program with intentionality. One of the important issues was building on the vision the university had done with the eventual users. We wanted to focus on the fundamental concepts of belonging. And we knew that the design had to address how users would interact with their environment at every scale in ways that would support the university's desired outcomes. So we called that nesting scales. So we were designing specifically to interaction and experiencing their environment in the room that they lived in and at the macro level of how their environment related to the university as a whole or even to the community. So we designed it with intentionality at each of those scales. And we also knew that we had to address the need of every user. In a community like this, there is a wide diversity of users, whether it's folks living there, teaching there, servicing the students in the dining area, or managing and taking care of facilities. We had to reinforce empathetic thinking in our designers to make sure that they were paying attention to the points of view of each one of these user stakeholders. So what we did is we developed character personas, and these user personas were developed in ways that, based on the research of who we knew was going to be occupying and using this facility, they had characteristics that we wanted to understand. And we then further employed them as we moved into design to pay attention to those and call them forward in our environment, in our design workshops, to make sure that we were paying attention to each of them in mapping their experience through the different facilities we were designing and the floor areas of different user spaces. We wanted to make sure that we understood who was going to be moving through those spaces, where they were going, when they were going to be there, and we were paying attention to locations and places where we could design for the sort of interactions and experiences that we wanted the students to have. So let me give you a little bit of an overview. You can see in this aerial rendering the resulting design and the concepts that were starting to be employed. And I'll come back to this in more detail as I move forward, but you can see it's a rather large project over a couple of city block area with multiple buildings that had various program uses, as I mentioned, in a very integrated way. And this slide gives you an idea of where the various components of the program, I'm sorry, go to the next one. The various components of the program were distributed. The orangish yellow colors on the left were the residential spaces. The bluish spaces were mostly academic and instructional. And then the pink spaces were the more community type locations. And you can see that it was quite varied in the locations, but that gives you kind of an idea of where all of the different spaces were going to be located in the project. The next slide shows you basically the site plan and how it was developed. So the buildings formed, were moved to the perimeter of the site. There was a desire to keep as much open space as possible. We created 2 quads for the project in the center of the space, and these sort of buildings around the perimeter were the outdoor rooms or outdoor walls, if you will, to these outdoor spaces. And they were quite permeable at the ground plane, especially in making sure that we were providing linkages and views to different aspects of the surrounding university. Through the center of the site, top to bottom, you can see there's a street that actually goes through the site. And that became an important focal point for what we call the main street of the campus. So on this diagram, you can see, as I showed you in the 3-dimensional diagram, the living areas were mostly concentrated toward the more private parts of the site to the west, and the learning areas more closely toward the university, which is on the right. This, if you remember, on the right where the word learning is the main north-south pedestrian access called Ridgewalk, which is the sort of string, if you will, that connects all of these pearls together along the ridge. But those spaces weren't completely segregated in the way these color diagram shows. There were spaces from both learning and living mixed up into all of the buildings across the site. And you can see that in the next slide, which is a photograph of the site. Next slide, please. It's a photograph of the site taken on Scholars Drive, or the main street, if you will, of the university campus at North Torrey Pines. On the right is the dining hall with some instructional spaces above, a market at the street level down below, which the students love for groceries and sundries. And then on the left, you can see at the base of the building, there's a commuter lounge and other sort of instructional spaces with the administrative building above that, which is the glass building. And then at top of that, of course, are some of the student residents. So in this one view, you can see how the program was so interspersed throughout the space or throughout the campus. This diagram shows that we didn't only do that with program spaces or the built forms, but we were very intentional about how all of the outdoor spaces were also designed to, again, accomplish the goals of the client in creating specific spaces for different uses, for different personality types, with some see and be seen spaces, some more private spaces, some that were very active, some that were more passive, some that were for play or exercise, outdoor spaces for learning or sharing or studying. We wanted to make sure that we were creating these very intentionally with all of the different aspects of them that would create them as draws and opportunities to encourage social interaction and learning. You can see in the following images from the project that some of, for instance, in regards to these outdoor spaces, we also had rooftop spaces where programs such as workplace environments, residential environments could spill out onto the rooftops and take advantage of the climate that is so beautiful in La Jolla. We also made sure that in learning environments, there were opportunities to move learning experiences to the outdoors, taking advantage of the climate and making sure that you could, the walls could open and outdoor spaces could be enjoyed for a variety of different learning opportunities. The workplace environments likewise took full advantage of the views, giving outdoor decks and generous glass in order to see both over the campus, but also to the ocean. And for the residential spaces, taking, next slide, please. Next slide, there you go. The residential spaces, we made sure that in all of the social and interactive spaces on residential floors where there are community kitchens, learning and socializing spaces and multi-floor opportunities to connect levels, there were also outdoor balconies and views, again, making sure that we were taking full advantage of the outdoors. The next thing that was really important to make sure that we were accomplishing the university goals was paying close attention to designing for human scale. The tenants of the new space, or the new campus, was called Six College, and they were moving from an incubator location, which is what was called Camp Snoopy. And you can see from these images that it was very much a camp, if you will, very small residential buildings located in a wooded environment. So the students fell in love with this way of being together and having this very intimate sort of special spaces. But it became obviously very difficult to figure out how are we going to deal with the sorts of things there that gave community in a much larger and much denser environment. The next slide shows that we did that through paying close attention to how we dealt with scale. We broke down the scales in ways that are shown in this diagram, and this occurred across all buildings, making sure that we always stepped the buildings away from the facade as the buildings went up. The buildings at the ground level were never more than 4 stories tall. And the podium at the top, which is called the terrace level, was where mixed opportunities for the buildings could be used and flow out onto rooftop terraces like laundries, music rooms, study areas, things like that. And then, of course, at the top, roof opportunities were also put into play. The street level was always saved for uses that were very active and could be scaled to pedestrian activity as they passed by. So in these next images, you can see how that massing concept and the topology of the building forms played out in a way that attempted to break down the scale of the buildings to make them more welcoming and more relatable from a scale standpoint. The next one, again, you can see how the building forms and shapes were played down to create these outdoor spaces of different types. This one as well, you can see a residential building on the left with the administration building in the middle and access to parking. Residential buildings belong beyond. The bending of the buildings made sure that you weren't seeing full facades front on in any one time. So again, it visually minimized the scale of the project. So the design team adopted all of these various principles and processes to address the university's goals of creating a sense of belonging in ways that would increase socialization and benefit higher student achievement and employee effectiveness. And this is another way of saying that our design is really a hypothesis, right? So what that meant for us is the hypothesis then became, if we can improve the health and well-being on this campus, or I'm sorry, if health and well-being will improve on this campus after moving to this campus from the previous campus? Can we do things based on what we knew from their previous environment here that will increase their health and well-being and lead to better outcomes that the university wanted by fostering meaningful community? As construction was finishing and the project was preparing to open, the pandemic set in, and a second hypothesis emerged, the COVID hypothesis. Designing for health and well-being will provide pandemic resilience. We wanted to understand if the things we had done to design spaces to increase health and well-being for the users would also give us a benefit in creating resilience during a pandemic. Diana's going to tell you a little bit more about what we put in place and what we studied from that point on.
Thank you, Thom. Hope everybody can hear me. For the early days of the pandemic, the HKS research team was writing a white paper about community resilience called Community Block. It was really a theoretical view of city planning and concepts applied to thinking about what aspects of a community are helpful in flexing into a pandemic situation. Later on, we'll put thank you, Jeff, put a link to the full report if you're interested in reading a little bit more. But we thought that, our project here with the early concepts of approaching design of, Thom had alluded, health and well-being of our users, how does that translate into elements that make up a resilient neighborhood? So we applied community block principles. For what do these findings really mean in an actual pandemic situation for a college campus? So the C block report really establishes 6 key principles that really define an ecosystem that supports life and learning continuity. You can see the 6 principles on the screen. They range from de-densification, modifying circulation paths, and addressing safety and gatherings, to name a few. And these really understand what can we do with our existing infrastructure within our neighborhood that doesn't cause life to just stop. If, in the future, perhaps a different pandemic could potentially impact student and staff's lives. So with the 6 principles in mind, designers can really employ these to aid communities of which they are in being a little bit more resilient. So we've identified 12 design strategies as applied to the North Torrey Pines community. It really addresses the importance of things like access to parks, like the east or the west quad that we set up in our original project, easy walkability, access to daylight, natural ventilation, and the ability to really benefit from an integrated mixed-use community. As Thom had alluded to, our learning to living really starts to blend and meld across the 6 buildings. So I wanted to highlight just 2 really quick examples of these design strategies. For cloud print support, you see San Diego is really quite adept at providing infrastructure for outlets, Wi-Fi, and because of the nature of our project providing a variety of outdoor spaces, students can hypothetically and did study from all aspects, all areas of our neighborhood. They can study in the quad, they could study in the upper terraces, so that was really supported in a pandemic situation. Naturally, the natural ventilation side, really giving thermal comfort to students within their bedrooms, had a COVID advantage of being able to bring in the fresh air in the individual rooms without having to circulate airborne particulates back into the central air system, because we didn't have a central air system within the housing program. So that helped mitigate some of the infection control aspects during the pandemic. As we trudge forward with the guiding principles and the different design strategies, we looked at the 6 levers that really can be activated by the community at the first sign of any infectious disease for this where we are currently and any time in the future. So we start to see and identify what really can you see San Diego do. I'm just going to kind of click through between creating checkpoints and access control. They have no zero guest policy, strict drop-off and unloading procedures. Another lever is circulation and flow. What does that mean for controlling vehicular and pedestrian flow? So they closed off Scholars Drive, so it's only pedestrian to give a little bit more breathing room. Access to essential services, because our neighborhood was designed in a way that we had a dining hall, we had a concierge with mail, drop-off points for mobile vans like Amazon to come. essential services really were able to be delivered to the students while they were living on Torrey Pines. There's programs that shifted, like for example, like we had a lecture hall, pre-function space, which was a wide expansive space. There was no in-person classes, so that space was really shifted to potential COVID testing or study zones for students, de-densification and pedestrianized streets, like I mentioned before. Single occupancy rooms were converted. So there is a little bit more control of that congregating of students, and also contact tracing. So, with apps such as Google and Apple, UC San Diego was able to kind of monitor where potential outbreaks would be coming from through the contact tracing. So as we kind of moved forward in construction and the move-in date for the students was set for the fall of last year, it really wasn't the day one that we had designed for and expected. It just, nobody had anticipated it, but it was just different. And everybody really made the best of it. The college experience and excitement of moving in really wasn't diminished. So I'll kind of click through some of the attributes of what we had originally designed, which became a COVID advantage. For example, we planned for civic engagement and social interaction for students living on the same floor, so they would feel like they're part of a community. Thom had showed a kind of a real photo, but these kind of residential floors, you step off the elevator, you're greeted with a multi-story great room with a direct access to the outside balcony. So it was breathable. It's possible for students to use the kitchen so they can cook meals, which really turned into a COVID advantage that they don't always have to go out to get food from public restaurants during the peak of that pandemic. Some of the design principles that we really wanted to encourage a healthy lifestyle for students. We didn't anticipate that the COVID advantage was, great, this is access to the outdoors on the ground and at every level of the floor, made it possible to access nature, exercise, and safely distance outside. We had open areas for connection. So providing these variety of spaces, as you can see, study and group activity on the upper terraces, a community garden where students can grow their own lettuce, social communal spaces on activity of the ground floor. All of these different characters and personalities of these outdoor spaces really provided safe interaction. So there is social connectivity for students. And all of this rolled into being able to access nature, views, and air. We know this is good practice. We know it's sustainable. But these aspects of design are really important from a COVID benefit, addressing the needs of physical health, mental needs for any environment is our responsibility. And it really provided significant benefits in operating during a pandemic. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Upali. She is the brain mastermind behind Community Block and a lot of our analysis that she and Elinor are going to speak to.
And more importantly, Diana, I think this project is so unique in the fact that it had a research requirement from day one that came from the client. It had a design team that was very investigative. So we were really balancing evidence and empathy from day one. And the statement that Thom prompted, design as a hypothesis, is the other end of the sentence, is lived experience as the outcome. The only way of linking design to outcome is to study it, because till the time that we've designed it, we think we know what's going to happen. We don't know until we go back and really observe and measure. Next. So we've been really lucky to have Elinor on board, who is our Live Learn Fellow, who has been on site doing a lot of the studies. We are doing a longitudinal study on this project. And this image, I put it out there because we often get to see the coffee table images. We get to see the images that are in the books. But these kind of ad hoc images captured on a day-by-day level are really, really important. They give us a sense of what's happening. And like Elinor put in the chat, that not all of these spaces that were designed that Diana showed for resilience have been open to the students. So we are starting to see the slow opening up and how that resilience that is built in is slowly being used. And you can see that in these images of the green spaces and some of the outdoor areas. You won't see as much about the indoor spaces today because those spaces have not yet been opened. Next slide. So the goals of this project are super simple. Assess student behaviors and habits related to social connection, learning, health, and well-being, as well as environmental stewardship. There's a huge sustainability component. Our students also displaying good stewardship behaviors, comparing space utilization patterns and behavior changes to see if this neighborhood really works, compare overall student well-being as well as academic achievement. And then what you see in blue is the COVID question that's come up, that how do our environments meet the needs of students, social needs, et cetera, especially during pandemic times. And the interior environment is not something we're going to talk about today, but you'll see that when we come back with the other half of our results. Next slide. One of the biggest things in this particular project was HKS realizing early on that studies like this could not and should not be done by a single institution. We created a coalition with our nonprofit, the Center for Advanced Design Research and Evaluation. HKS became a coalition partner, UC San Diego became a coalition partner, and ANFA, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, became a coalition partner. And the idea was really simple, that if you have a large capital project in an academic campus, they should serve as living labs for research and innovation on campus. Why not, right? If you're building a brand new campus in a university, what better place to study it? So this project is part of a neighborhood study. It's part of a sustainability course that is being taught at UC San Diego. It's part of a NeuroLab course that is being taught at UC San Diego, and then the longitudinal pre and post study that I'll talk to you about with Elinor. There's also a quote on that previous slide, Diana, just from the provost. Six College is a living lab that uses architecture to augment positive behaviors and outcomes and integrates the understanding into current academics and future capital planning. Even if we don't get through all of the results, that's the one big idea we want you to walk away with. That the capital project is an engine for investigation and innovation that is integrated into the academic fabric and is going to inform future capital planning. Next. And part of this was being able to really leverage this trifecta of having a student who is also a resident, who is a participant observer, and funding a Live Learn Fellow through the coalition, which is Elinor. And you can see from the chat, like she is our objective observer. Like if we say, this is what we thought design would do, she comes right back and said, yeah, not quite working that way. And that's been a great check for us. So we are not post-rationalizing decisions. We are really investigating, learning, and moving that understanding to the next project. Next slide. And thank you, Jeff. Those links that Jeff put on the chat, you can go in and learn more about the coalition. This is a dense slide. We won't go into it in detail, but it really shows you that it's a multi-year project. Some of the work we can do in person. Because of COVID, a lot of our data collection has been virtual. But we studied the experience of the existing residential hall. We are now studying it in the new North Torrey Pines neighborhood, but in its COVID phase where things are slowly opening. And in year 3, when things are hopefully fully open, we'll go back and study it. And what we're using are surveys, focus groups, photo essays, observations, and you'll hear a little bit of that from Elinor as well. Next. Some of the statistics in the surveys that we already knew is that environmental satisfaction in spaces where students lived before COVID was lowest for the spaces they lived as compared to social areas or where they took their classes. So this is where there's the maximum opportunity for improvement. We repeat that in 2021, actually this month, later this month, and then again in 2022. So we'll have 3 points of data to compare. Next. We've also been asking questions about mental well-being. It's a little unnerving to see that 63% of the respondents have a pretty dismal score on the depression scale. And we are really trying to understand what we can do to improve these huge mental health concerns that we are starting to see. We don't know what it will look like in 2021. This was 2020 data. right when the pandemic had hit, 2021, we're going to collect this data within the next month, and then we'll do that again in 2022. The question we have to ask ourselves is design contributing or helping to aggravate this or to alleviate it? That's what we want to find out. Next slide. The same question also around sense of belonging. And you can see that in general, there is a pretty large sense of belonging, but you still have around 15, 16% of the population who don't really feel part of Sixth College and part of UCSD. Can that improve? Will that improve when they have a campus that is designed for belonging? So these are all questions we're going to find out. One thing we wanted to make sure today in the talk was we don't just show you fully baked results about how great we did, but show you what questions, hard questions we're asking ourselves, and share openly what worked and what didn't. Next slide. I'll pass it on to Elinor because the richest data we have right now is really from the on-site work that Elinor has been doing.
Thank you, Upali. So our need for pandemic-friendly research methods pointed to me, an embedded ethnographer, and with the benefit of being a student, resident, and participant observer, the data I gather was a little different than the design teams. So as a student, I have a better understanding of campus culture and know to highlight certain behaviors. And as a resident, my 24/7 access to the space let me capture data after business hours, like 2 a.m. skateboarding or the essential 10 p.m. snack runs, providing a richer view of student behavior. Speaking briefly to my methods, I collected 6 months of behavioral outcome data and tried to arrive at which design features prompted them. I gathered qualitative observations on trends and patterns through 3 photo essays, 1 upon moving in and 2 for each academic quarter, as well as a weekly observation journal. I also conducted quantitative behavior mapping to gather data on space utilization, capturing how, when, and where students use the space. Next slide. Expanding on my research, I focused on 3 aspects of well-being that the design sought to encourage: social health, mental health, and physical health. I found that these aspects acted as interrelated layers throughout my data collection, with mental health sandwiched between social and physical health. The findings I'm showing primarily get at the social and physical aspects. So beginning with the role of design and resiliency, we saw how flexible space utilization options were essential to maintaining a sense of community and normalcy. Students could congregate according to social distancing rules, but also accommodate their individual level of comfortable proximity. Throughout the pandemic, I noticed everyday and even default usage of the staircase connecting the residential and academic segments of the neighborhood. This is in no small part due to the landings of the staircase, which functioned as an organic platform for social distancing and allowed groups to naturally separate along those landings, as you can see in that top image. And the size and openness of the space also allowed people to congregate in larger groups, but still distance and do that safely, especially now at lower risk times when bigger groups are coming together. And the ability to be comfortably separate is also highlighted in the seating options. And given the alone together clustering of students studying, students are able to study not only at their desired level of distance for social distancing, but just, maintain their study bubble. Next slide. Now, looking into the window usage, this example of socialization gets at our objective to learn which digital and physical environments promote connection. So because the dorm room windows were large and highly visible from the ground floor, students broadcasted their social affiliations and personal information through post-it note messages, banners, and other displays. This enabled non-physical interaction and a sense of interconnection during early, higher risk pandemic times. Highlighting the image on the left, these colorful rooms speak to students' usage of TikTok, which this is effectively a physical manifestation of digital socialization. How cool. And this shows how students are connecting, but also allows students to belong to communities in both realms, one on the app and the other in person, as TikTok users can identify other users in the broader Sixth community. Longitudinally, it'll be interesting to see whether the next wave of incoming students continue this behavior and see whether this was simply compensation for early isolation or if it fulfilled a totally different need of, say, making the space their own. So this image and map data show the role of food as a social catalyst, highlighting the significance of programming and influencing behavior. We saw how student clustering patterns changed after the opening of food options as students congregated dramatically more over a short period of time. The top blue map captures 89 days of behavior before the dining hall opened, while the bottom red map captures 15 days after the dining hall opened. We also saw how students congregated more fluidly, especially in more spontaneous ways. And speaking to program, this outdoor area serves as an extension of the dining hall due to its proximity, but the opportunity afforded by its openness meant that observed space utilization went beyond students eating to students waiting to pick up food and even students anticipating eating at a much later time.
And all of this data, like the qualitative insights and then getting quantitative data to really understand those have been used based on a behavior mapping methodology, where we're getting multiple data points on where is the actual behavior happening and then correlating it to attributes of space. So you can see we have multiple data points here. I know we're going to run probably a little out of time. So as I wrap this up, I'd like to encourage all our attendees to start putting questions into the chat so we can hit those with the time we have remaining. Next slide. So behavior mapping is really an organized way of capturing what behaviors are happening, where they're happening, and what activities are happening during that behavior. That's what you saw from Elinor's both qualitative data and now quantitative measurement of that data in terms of behavior mapping. Here you see the walking and seating behavior maps. Next slide. And here you start saying, okay, now that we know the patterns of behavior, we have enough data to start seeing the pattern emerge. What attribute of space is contributing to it? Is it the configuration? Is it the way we design the section? Is it the materiality? Is it the sensory component? Now that you see a pattern, you can start understanding the why. What is it? We designed with this intent. We start seeing this pattern. What's contributing to it? Why are students congregating in some spaces but not others? Why are they doing certain activities in certain spaces and not others? So here you see the clustering of behavior on where are they walking, and the main spine that Thom talked about early on. You can see people are using it as a spine, as a thoroughfare, but they're also using the open areas to sit, to hang out, to do other activities. Next slide. Trying to understand these components as an element of prospect and refuge that in environmental psychology we talk about all the time. Places that have large vistas, large visibility components, that's where people are sitting in groups. Places that are a little more tucked away, that's where we see more individual activities. The data is still messy. These are still emerging insights. We need to clean it out. But once patterns start emerging, when you have enough data, the patterns start emerging that you can make some conclusions from it. Next slide. So again, this is what we're spending our time doing right now, saying, okay, we see the pattern of behavior. Why are we seeing more seating behavior? Is it just that there are chairs to sit? But no, people are sitting on the lawns, people are sitting in the grass. What is the attribute of the space that kind of supports certain behaviors and not others? Because that's how social connection builds. And what Elinor said about the dining hall and the market, these are spaces that are activated not because of just design elements, but the programming elements that are in there. So design plus program is what can result in social connection. And social connection has increased after the market and dining hall have opened. And the spaces around those, because they were designed for social connection, are promoting that. So again, these are visuals that now start helping us see, okay, that pattern of behavior happening in these spaces lets us understand if the design intent is matching the observed outcome. Next slide. We're also looking at what type of activities happen at different times of the day. And that's telling us that, well, more group activities are happening in the night. So are we designing for nighttime? Are we really focusing on that nighttime design, which is easy sometimes to forget? Next slide. Also really understanding a hybrid approach, understanding that if you want social experience, it might be more in digital spaces and more in physical spaces, depending on what, in this case, the pandemic brought, but other constraints as well. But I think this is the year that we all accept that we have to think of hybrid strategies. You go, Dan. You can go to the next slide. That we have to think about hybrid strategies, think about public and buffer spaces. And then some of the other very little but very significant insights we're getting is around the importance of acoustics, or something like blinds, that when you choose blinds for lighting, it's the same transparency that becomes an issue for privacy at night. So really, really thinking about what something means in the daytime and the nighttime for different sizes of groups. Next slide. And that's what we'll leave you guys with, that really we are learning as we go. We're in the middle of the study. We've learned that working with nature and maximizing our resources gives us resilience. We've learned that buffers are important, both in the construction process, but also in space for thresholds. We've learned flexibility is important, both physical and digital strategies. The nested scales really do help. And then access and acoustics that have been concerns that have come up that we're starting to focus on. And that, I think, leaves us with just 3 gorgeous minutes for questions, if any have come up. Thank you guys so much. Any questions or comments?
Jeff asked one in the chat. So to Upali and Thom, design plus program equals social connection. What early results have you found that might inform your next design?
I think the market and the dining hall, like that's one of the things that we saw, that having a market and a dining hall are both great. And having a market is what's really helping people make healthy cooking choices. And then really getting spaces like that, and we'll probably leverage the lounge spaces internally because they can cook together. The dining hall is helping people socialize while they eat outside. So I think that will definitely inform the next design, the next big project that we are doing as well, where these results are being translated. And Thom, I don't know if you want to talk about that. Yeah.
Maybe just one thing I would add. I think especially in this environment, we're very lucky in La Jolla to be able to accommodate so much activity outdoors. But the fact that it has to be thoughtfully done, right? We did a lot of human comfort studies to understand each of these different spaces, what the intended uses were, whether they needed shade or wind protection. We're finding that very simple decisions like what a tabletop is made out of might cause too much reflection, or might be not welcoming enough, or what types of furniture, or what kinds of shade, or what types of vistas. There are so many things to pay attention to, which means that a fully integrated design team thinking through these things together and making those decisions with all these different points of view in mind is really key to making sure that the spaces are doing and accommodating the sort of behavior that we're after. Upali, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
I was saying, just like not having overly reflective materials, that's a lesson learned for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, all of us are probably, our contact information is in there, right, in the program, Diana?
I believe so, but I can also put in some additional information in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to us as well.
Yeah. And all the websites also will give us access to who the team is. So we would love to have conversations, and the intention of a coalition is to go wide in terms of partnerships. So if anyone wants to partner with us on this study, do reach out. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
I see the link will be open for 2 minutes, which may be up now.
Can I stop the recording?